This week on Technically Creative, I'm joined by Darren O'Kelly. He's managing director and co-founder of Untold Studios, one of the most dynamic creative companies to emerge in the last decade. Their VFX work can be seen in shows like The Crown and Alien Earth and 1923, as well as countless music videos and commercials. Darren spent nearly 2 decades at the mill, rising to become managing director, and he led the London office through a golden era of visual effects and world-class commercial work. But when Technicolor took over, Darren decided to strike out on his own to recapture some of the independent creative control the mill had now lost. The result was Untold, an independent, cloud-native creative studio designed from day one to challenge the status quo. In this conversation, Darren and I dig into what it takes to build a modern post-production company, not just technologically, but also creatively and culturally. We talk about Untold's rapid evolution across VFX and design, and how their early embrace of cloud workflows allowed them to scale fast, and how their investment in AI focuses on precision tools for artists rather than shortcuts. We also reflect on the changing shape of the VFX industry, with closures of great companies like Glassworks and The Mill and MPC, the enduring importance of human connection in storytelling, and why the future belongs to companies that can move fast without sacrificing craft. Darren's the best, and I really had a good time talking to him, and I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks so much. Darren, I'm thrilled to have you on. And you run Untold Studios. You and I go way back to your 20 years spent at the mill, and you were managing director of the Mill London, the jewel in the crown of the mill operation. And of course, as you just referenced, Technicolor collapsed near 6 to 9 months ago, and leading to the end of the mill and MPC. And you started Untold, what is 7 years ago now?
7 years ago. Yeah. 7 years ago next month. Yeah. Yeah.
And Untold, from the get-go, has kind of gone from strength to strength, starting out as VFX design, entertainment, as well as commercials, as well as music promos. It's like, it feels like most companies, it takes them forever to be able to prove that they can do all of these different verticals. And it really seemed like to me that you guys came out of the gate and were like, by the way, we do everything on day one. I'm sure that's not how it felt, but that is how it looked like from the outside.
I think, I guess we had this thought, it's still true today. Like we wanted to, build an independent creative studio, and independent was important as not just from an ownership perspective, but actually from a thought perspective. Like, how do we challenge the status quo? How do we do things a little bit differently? And I think the world didn't need another development house, a production company, an agency, visual effects studio. None of those things were needed. But if you started to piece lots of that stuff together, you could kind of create something a little bit unique and different. So we felt we needed to do that from the outset. And creative studio is really a very nebulous descriptor of a company that is able to flex itself creatively in lots of different ways. And, for us, we wanted to, the true line today, as it was when we first started, is we want to make culturally impactful work, whether that's working, we developed a show with Amazon, a music show called Songline with Amazon, that, shooting with Billie Eilish or Imagine Dragons, really kind of interesting artists to work with. But from a cultural relevance, if you're working on The Crown or Mission Impossible or doing 5 Super Bowl spots or whatever, you're inherently part of culture. And I think we want to make the work that audiences want to watch, because that's the kind of work that our teams want to make, right? And then that's sort of self-fulfilling. You become a destination for talent. So it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah, it feels like you guys kind of created something quite special out of the gate. When something like Technicolor collapses and the mill and MPC close, a lot of people don't think about, well, where do the projects go that were operating at the time? And you just kind of, said that they kind of go to places like you. But there's an inherent opportunity there, isn't it? There's one less giant in the room to take up work, but also there's huge amounts of talent that suddenly, that very well, that's suddenly on the open market, and you go, well, this is great. This is, these are some of the best VFX artists in the world, and now we can can bring them into the fold. Does it feel like an opportunity when that happens?
To an extent, like I think, I spent 15 years at the mill. I kind of, I've huge nostalgic kind of memories of my time there, and working with people like Pat Joseph as a mentor. You couldn't but be imbued with a kind of respect for craft and creativity. And so when something like that collapses, like there's a kind of sadness to it, right? But in truth, not an awful lot of surprise, because I think, starting Untold, I think having now spoken to lots of entrepreneurs since then, I think that the common thread I found is that there is typically push and pull factors. The push factors, in my case, where I sold the mill to Technicolor, and it was a simple question: is the next 10 years likely to be as exciting as the last 10 years? And it was clear from sort of day two that it wouldn't be. Now, that's not usually enough to make you set up your own company. I think the pull factors end up being like, are we excited about the opportunity to do something different? Is there kind of elements of what we've done in the past that could help shape what we do in the future? And also, are there things that we've learned around bringing in real deep expertise in different areas to do new things that excite us? And the answer to that was yes. And I think, I guess when another business collapses, it might mean that the market is flooded with talent, but I think you've still got to be really clear about what your North Star is, and yes, be able to respond to things changing, but don't lose sight of what it is you're trying to build. I've no interest in recreating what the mill is. I'm told it's a completely different kind of company. And so, the reality actually of what we ended up doing is there was one particular project out of MPC in Toronto that was for Alien Earth that again, the show. There was literally people running around with hard drives. Everybody's trying to figure out who owns the assets. Is it the studio? Is it the administrators? Who?
Right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of panic around, and I think
because the administrators actually own the hard drives, but all the digital and stuff that's on the hard drives is owned by FX.
Just wild, right?
Yeah.
One of the reason why we ended up getting involved in that from a VFX perspective, we established our credentials in commercials doing really high-end creature work. We've been fortunate enough to produce, I think, some of the most outstanding creature work in that space. And we had a very clear North Star that we wanted to do the same in the film and episodic space. And we've done a lot of film and episodic work, whether it was for The Crown or, Mission Impossible, all sorts of various different projects.
Yeah, 1923, The Boys, incredible list of shows.
Loads of really good shows. But what Alien Earth represented was creature, really complicated, challenging creature work. And it was an opportunity to kind of accelerate a goal that we had set for ourselves within film and episodic and visual effects work. And so we were determined to try and make that happen and provide a lifeline for effects for the show and for the people that were doing it. And we'd made a strategic decision at the very beginning of Untold to be entirely cloud native and we were the world's first cloud-based studio, and that had allowed us to turn talent on very quickly. We could get people working, immediately. Within 10 days of Technicolor collapsing, we had taken on all of Alien Earth, 550 shots, integrated the team into our business, and supported it with a whole bunch of kind of supervision and artistry in London and in Mumbai as well. So but it was a pretty special moment, and we were so proud of the results. Like, it obviously came out quite recently, and just the quality of the creature work on it is pretty special.
I've watched it. I've watched all episodes so far. It's a pretty great show.
It's not for the faint of heart, right?
No, definitely not. Is there a little bit of a sort of knowing wink? Just in terms of your career. Obviously Ridley is, one of the directors who's not only big British commercial director, but obviously kind of really put the mill on the map with Gladiator. You know, the stuff that the mill did with on Gladiator won them an Oscar. You used to run the mill. Now you're doing, you know, Untold. Is there a kind of nice knowing moment when an alien project comes to the door? Do you go like, oh, this is some DNA I recognize?
I think look, there's a bit of serendipity, isn't there? A bit of what's that expression, like pay it forward? I think you don't quite know what things are going to happen. We've made quite a lot of sort of what we would think are important strategic decisions, whether it was cloud-based or kind of the values of the business, or, you know, investing, for example, in having a music business from the very get-go. We didn't quite know where they would all take us. You know, what we found is that opportunities that you might not expect come towards you if you make kind of pretty sound decisions that are creatively interesting. And people often ask, like, you know, what do you think is going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years at Untold? And like, we're 7 years old. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. Like in our existence, we were 18 months alive before COVID, and my God, like everybody thought the world was about to end, you know, and we doubled in size for the next 2 years. It's a business that's been forged in adversity, but not with foresight of what's going to happen, just by being alert and being future facing. I think I often have said it. We have always been trying to build a company for the future. We just had no idea what the future would look like. And I think even today, people kind of go, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years? Most of the kind of ubiquitous AI technology that consumers are now using on a daily basis literally didn't exist 2 years ago. So trying to be predictive or prescient about the future seems a slightly vacuous exercise to me. Much better to be creating a culture that is able to respond to the opportunities that are there, and really be alert to how, you know, responding to, like, if you've got technology baked in, you're able to unlock creative opportunities that might not otherwise have been there. And that's been important for us.
Yeah, because I think that obviously one of the biggest things I think we're seeing is a lot of people are saying, well, VFX is kind of screwed in many ways. And I don't really agree with that. I think that, like, obviously, you guys going cloud-based, I think that's almost a bigger shift necessarily than the AI shift.
It's a choice around where you put your capital, right? And I would much rather spend on talent than technology, but then provide that talent with the most state-of-the-art technology. An example now, in effect, by being cloud-based, we've had unlimited compute and technology firepower from the very get-go. We partner very much with AWS. And I think, like, as the AI revolution kind of starts to impact in the VFX space, there will be winners and losers in terms of how you respond to that. And some of it will simply be determined by what is the compute power that you have available to you to do things. And I think in that kind of AI sort of revolution, from a VFX perspective, it's really important to make a distinction between consumer-facing products that are designed for 4 billion people and are really powerful and fun, actually, and professional-grade workflows, tools, and models that are about precision control. One thing that we have learned, and I have learned in 20 years of being in the industry, is precision control is non-negotiable when you're working with Ridley Scott or when you're working with AAA list directors. And I think, so our investment in AI, and we've got a number of different models and tools that are addressing really complex creative problems. Like, for example, we have built an AI model to tackle de-aging. So it's a kind of common request we get in the film and entertainment space around, we've got an actor who's 45 today, and in 2 episodes, we want them to be 25, and we don't want to cast a lookalike. We want to use the same actor. Tackling that as a VFX solution in the past was pretty, it looked pretty shit most of the time. That's the reality. It just didn't look as good as it ought to look. We build a simulation model that allows you to do that. And it, I guess, gets you, and I think it's technology in the hands of innovators and artists that, it's really complex work, but it's a simulation model that allows you to de-age an actor by, for example, 15 years in a totally credible and controllable way that means that the director still has the freedom to shoot. Now, it's not push a button and hope it all works. It's a lot of work that goes into that. And then a lot of artistry that sits on top of that to get you to finished pixel. And I think at the end of the day, the demand for, breathtaking, beautiful finished pixel is not going to go away in either high-end commercial work or film or entertainment projects. And so I'm pretty happy about the direction of traffic.
It's funny because there was an article that was posted about, how Google just ate Adobe. And I was like, this doesn't understand the business at all. Like, Nano Banana, as great and as fun as it is, the people who are going to see that output and be happy weren't signed up to the Creative Cloud anyway. They were not Adobe Photoshop users. And I think that that's the other thing. I think a lot of people writing these articles are people who haven't used Photoshop or haven't used Avid or haven't used professional level tools, have, as you say, a degree of precision that is just required of anybody who's working in a creatively professional space.
Like the phone in our hands is a pretty powerful video camera and camera now. And often there have been occasions where we shot commercials on those phones, normally because it's for those brands. Generally, we're shooting on an Arri Alexa, or, so like, despite putting really powerful camera technology, for example, in the hand of a consumer, professional grade tools are still required to have that really nuanced control. And I don't think that's going away. And actually the AI models being built for consumers frankly just aren't designed for the kind of finish that we are expected to deliver, like whether it's kind of resolutions, that's just not, that's not you're not going to get that out of AI right now.
Yeah. And I think that I think that the other thing that people kind of forget is that post companies have always been full of creative technologists. I know a lot of people are sort of putting up their hands and sort of stating they are one now, but you guys have always been kind of understanding the new plugin that can do hair just right, or, the various libraries and tech opportunities to improve just 1%, one set of pixels across, and that capability is still in-house with the people you have. And so they're going to be kept up to speed with everything that's happening, but also, training LoRa's and things like that, that's not happening at the consumer level. That's happening at the professional level.
Yeah, and look, I think the history of visual effects is technology, innovation, compute power in the hands of really brilliant artists. And I think that the dialogue that happens between those, between technology and artistry and technologists and artistry is incredibly powerful. And when you support that with really powerful compute, you can do pretty extraordinary things. But what you're never doing, and I've watched iterations, and you'll remember when doing CGI crowds became a thing of marvel, or doing fur or hair became a thing of marvel. Like the journey is littered with moments that are big changes. And I suppose anything that accelerates the kind of the first 80% of what you do, is always going to be useful. But the truth of it is, when we're working on a VFX project, doing VFX work, we're paid for the last 20% because, most of the people, pretty much everybody out there can get it to 80% good. There's very few that can get it to 100% good. When you're trying to create fully CG, beautifully believable walrus or elephant for Virgin Media, like that last mile is the hard bit. And it's the bit that audiences won't forgive you for if you get wrong. They'll just say it doesn't look right.
Yeah, that's so true. The notion that seems to be pervasive is that certain things are going to go away. And I just don't think that's true. I think that there will be probably more strata or more levels to the game. I think that certainly creators are going to have access to tools that they didn't have before. And there's going to be a level of, there's going to be a degree to which they level up a bit. And some will, hopefully, reach higher and higher points. And I think they'll start to learn more things. But I certainly don't think that the desire for complete entertainment immersion or complete storytelling immersion in incredibly well produced, worlds, both from a production and VFX standpoint, is ever going to go away entirely. I mean, it's just not, that I just don't think that that's a reality. We like it too much. I mean, too many people went to go see Superman.
I think it's always it comes back to human connection, right? Like ultimately we respond to story and we respond to human connection. And I think all of us have seen movies where the effects have become more important than the narrative and they lose the audience. And I think, in anything that we're trying to do, I think we're trying to make work that elicits emotion, that makes you feel something. When something's not in service of story, it tends not to do that. And so I think from our perspective, we get a kick out of making work, whether it's from design, whether it's production, whether it's visual effects, whether it's creating music content that is, makes you feel something. And as soon as it stops making you feel something, it's just noise. And you've got to, an audience will reject it. And so, and I don't think any technology can fully replicate that sense of human connection. I don't know whether you saw it, but like in the last year, about a year ago, you'd look at a treatment or an image or come through from, and it would be from Mid-Journey images in it, and you kind of look at it and go, oh my God, that's really impressive. And a year later, people are going, oh my God, if I see another AI image, it's just making me feel queasy, right? Because it's missing that kind of tactile feel, right? So I think there's just we're very sophisticated in our ability to detect what feels synthetic and emotionally synthetic versus real. And I think like there's an element of storytellers can use whatever tools they want, right? Mm-hmm. And if they can make you feel something because they're telling it, even through the limitations of technology, you mentioned 5-second shots, those shots will get longer, right? But I think at the moment the conversation is prioritizing the technology over the storytelling and the artistry. And I think, it becomes another suite in the tool set and toolbox of storytellers to use appropriately, as opposed to be a substitute for narrative emotion. And I think I think people will, there will be amazing films that get made that, I think, the opportunity, and we've seen it ourselves, the opportunity to do kind of wonderful, wild things in a music video through AI are pretty special. But but it has to be kind of grounded in an idea or in a, something you're trying to communicate, and that it becomes the vehicle to kind of get there, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, I think especially that commercials are going to be a little bit safer for longer, because I think that we're already so attuned to fakery in commercials. We're already put off by the fact that this is even happening, that actually they're under more of a responsibility to lean into humanity, because if they create more of an uncanny valley, more of a separation, it sort of reveals the thing for what it is, which is a cynical attempt to try to change your buying behavior and make you part from the money in your wallet. So, and I always thought that was the wonderful thing about, a director like Noam Murrow, is I always said that the thing that you could count on Noam for is if your brand is about wistful nostalgia. Service. Yeah. Sorry.
Great craft service.
Yeah. Fantastic craft service and good hugs. But yeah,
sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. But I think that that's what he does very well. If you want an emotion, he knows how to, in 60 seconds, get you to that emotion if you're a brand. And
but I think great stories, like whether it's, I think we both had the opportunity to work with Ringen, and I think he made small short films that had a brand baked into them, but you were totally engrossed in the narrative story. Often, in most cases, when Ringen was making work, there was no dialogue or anything like that happening, but there was this incredible kind of empathy and understanding of the human condition, and it came through the work, and a brand got to benefit from an extraordinary filmmaker.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, he was an absolute master of it. You know, you talked about Untold being a different kind of company. It was funny, I don't know whether we'll keep it in the edit, but you gave a little tour of the LA office, and I asked what turned out to be an incredibly silly question. I went, how many suites do you have? And you gave a very, developed, new world answer, which is, we don't really think about it like that. We don't really think about it in terms of suites. But, you talked about Untold being a new kind of company. Obviously, you moved completely cloud-based before anyone else. That was incredibly prescient. Also being independent, what else do you think kind of differentiates Untold, and what have you guys done to what makes it a new kind of company, a different kind of company?
I guess we're not really defined by the capabilities that we have. And what that means is that we share a common belief in trying to challenge the status quo in anything that we're doing, try to work with the most interesting brands, the most interesting studios, the most interesting labels, either that are at the top of the game or the challenger ones, and to kind of make work that's impactful. And I think what that means then is you've got a common DNA that can be applied to multiple different capabilities. So, what we do in music, I guess when we were starting Untold, right, we had this, do you remember this language that was being used all the time? Like everybody was talking about, we want to be really culturally relevant. We want to resonate with popular culture. And we're kind of going, yeah, that just sounds so wanky, but I kind of know what you mean. I kind of think we do want to be that thing. But it was trying to, like, at some level, we were trying to unpick some actions that sat behind that. And for us, one of the things was, like, if
we operate at the speed of culture was one of the
exactly. I mean, what does that mean? I still don't know what I mean. But I guess it's crazy, right? But we, like, unpicking it, we went, okay, let's take music as an example. If we're working with the music artists of a generation that are defining and shaping culture, then we are inherently relevant, right? And I suppose in terms of what differentiates Untold, I think what we then said about was bringing on board individuals who were deeply expert in their area and their field of influence. Phil Lee's our creative director across music, had spent 20 years at XL Recordings working with White Stripes, Radiohead, the XX. He is Adele's creative director. He works we've done tons of incredible projects since then. And I think, but why Phil joined is because he recognized that we want to do interesting creative work. That is the kind of the collective belief. Let's do work that matters. And we actually, Phil was paired, because there's a kind of quite a big belief in the blend of youth and experience. And the one man telling me he's about the same age as me, so he was a bit more mature as we were kind of getting going on at Untold. And he was joined by Annie, who's our head of music. She's based in LA now. I always joke that if Drake was in town in London, Annie would be at the party, and she'd also be quite quick to tell you, right? But that blend of kind of youth and experience opened up opportunities for us in music space. And fast forward 7 years later, and the music scene has evolved kind of considerably since then. But like what we're doing in production, what we're doing in music, what we're doing in technology, and what we're doing in VFX end up coming together in kind of weird and wonderful projects that, integrate artists with technology, with music, with brands. And we didn't plan for that, but that's kind of how they played out. And that's been really rewarding, I guess. And I guess there's just lots of examples of where, what differentiates us is having a collection of different disciplines working in close proximity and all expert in what they're doing, and kind of saying, like, if you put interesting people together, interesting things will happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather than trying to figure out what they're going to be, just see,
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of it since then.
Well, I mean, but how do you balance that? I mean, because obviously everybody kind of opens up a business saying, well, we want to do the most interesting, culturally relevant work we can possibly do, and we want to work with the best. But how do you balance that with the work that keeps the lights on? I mean, how do everybody's trying to get at that best creative work.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, I
get,
now
I think
obviously you guys are already there, but how do you do that in those first years, especially?
We did a simple rule, like, in everything that we did outside of charity, outside of pure charity, we need to make a margin on it. And that spanned, 15 grand music video to a 5 million project, right? But the same discipline needed to be applied to everything, because it's about having respect for your own contribution to it. So I think it's instilling a sense of art and commerce are not automatically in opposition. I think building a really good, strong commercial business is the license to do great work. It's the license to be a destination for great talent to want to work. And the better the work that you put out in the world, the better the clients that come knocking on your door to do more work. So I think we see that much more as a virtuous circle. And I think, it doesn't, I guess one of the things we have kind of tried to continue to do, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it. Like one of my early observations was that, this is maybe 8-9 years ago, was that I was beginning to see creative people in lots of different walks of life doing their most interesting work outside of work, as opposed to in the place they worked, and then the world exploded into kind of side hustle as a kind of phenomenon, and everybody was doing their most interesting work outside of work. I hear less side hustle now than I used to, but I think what we wanted to do was make Untold a place that if you had something interesting that you wanted to do, that we would be an environment that would look to support that. Whether that's releasing, we did a fashion collection that was, with a tie-dye artist. I have no idea why we did it, but it was an interesting idea that came out of somewhere, and we thought, yeah, okay, that's going to be good to do, and trying to create avenues for our own teams and staff to express themselves creatively, but it needs to be good, right? And then put it through the rigor of, is it good? And we've had that with directors as well. I'm sure you've experienced that, where you're kind of like, how do we help an emerging director develop their reel by doing kind of interesting work and getting behind that work and supporting it? And I think, but doing that in a professional context, so that you're quite demanding of, is the script ready? Is it good enough? Have you, here are the parameters from a budget or from a resource that can be committed to it. You've now got to work with the producers to work within those parameters and deliver something pretty special. And, a couple of our directors have done some really interesting work as a result of that. And I think that just pushing it through those kind of processes and that sort of thought process is helpful. But yeah, I guess I've never seen art and commerce as enemies. I think there's the best, some of the best opportunities, particularly when you acknowledge that we're not fine artists here, right? What we're doing is trying to make the most interesting work, whether that's for advertising or entertainment or music, and it needs to be paid for, and we need to work, and that's one of the parameters that will impact what that creative output should be.
Yeah. Well, I know you put your money where your mouth is a bunch of times in that respect. I was always amazed that there wasn't more of that. I certainly saw it more when I was at Wyden, and then I went to Fallon, and I actually produced a documentary that you guys did the post on when you were very kind and helped me out with that when you were at the Mill, and you guys conformed it, and you did the titling, and you did some little effect shots on this documentary, and like it won Tribeca Film Festival Special Jury Prize. Like it did very well. But I was always amazed when I asked the people at the agency I was at the time whether they might help. They were like, "Oh, well, I mean, what? Why?" And you kind of saw the benefit, and you were like, "Listen, I know it's a tiny documentary film done by a producer over there, but we'd like to be a part of it. We'd like to help." And I was always amazed at how few people there were like you in advertising who saw the value of just going, no, I think it's good that somebody's flexing that muscle, and I'm going to help them. Because there used to be all this talk about creativity, and then when you do something different, everybody kind of shut it down a little bit. And so I think that's a rare attitude, and I think it's very cool of you that you've now enshrined that in Untold.
Look, and I grew up with Pat Joseph, who I think Lee probably mentioned as well. I worked with him for 15 years. He was such an extraordinary influence and mentor and inspirational person to work with, who just taught me to believe in the power of creativity. The places I've drawn inspiration from in my life, you mentioned Wyden's. I mean, Wyden's is such an important part, and We all remember those 3 years of Fallon being pretty special, slightly toxic, but pretty special.
Very toxic.
Yeah. And there's these moments that happen where you kind of, you find inspiration and you realize that, incredible work can just change your own personal experience, change the trajectory of your own journey. And I think a lot of times, and I think we do that a lot of the time at Untold, is you do things not knowing what the outcome is going to be, but because they feel it instinctively like they're the things that are creatively interesting and powerful. Cuts to 3, 4, 5 years later, somebody comes back in and goes, you did that thing that was really interesting. We've got something that makes that happen. Or,
I mean, wasn't that Chris Cunningham's entire deal? I mean, Rubber Johnny and whatever else. You were just like, I don't know what I'm going to do with that guy, but I hope it's something,
Yeah, absolutely. Wild.
Just because I brought up Rubber Johnny. I mean, Glassworks is just closed, obviously Technicolor. I mean, is your feeling that the industry at large is going to be fine? There are just some outdated business models within VFX that need to go the way of the ghost, and that there is a bright future? Or is there just less food to go around and you guys are, protected because you've created just, an incredible moat of wonderful work that is attracting people at the moment?
I think it's a really emotive topic because, it's always sad when you see companies that at various points in their journey have been the very best in the game, or kind of, or close. I think it's true of all of the kind of related businesses. There's a regeneration. When you look at the advertising world, there's a world where you go, the advertising sector is, really having a really tough time. But do I think that Rick Brim is going to build an extraordinary agency? 100% I do. Absolutely no doubt I do. And is there space for the next generation and a new generation of creative people, producers, to build extraordinary companies? Of course there are. And I think, unquestionably, we're at a point of inflection. There will be, maybe it's crass language, but there will be winners and losers. And there are, legacy infrastructure, legacy models, legacy way of working that will disappear. But by the same token, there's a whole range of really exciting companies coming through. And I left to start Untold 7 years ago. I think since that time, there's probably 5 or 6 companies who I've, huge respect for, who started since then, and they're doing phenomenal work. And I think, so the opportunity for, I guess in my view, there's always space for excellence. And I have absolutely no deep concern about the future of the overall industry. And it goes through ebbs and flows. I mean, there is not going to be a world that we ever live in that isn't highly dependent on advertising, as an example. Yeah. It's not going to be a world we live in that's not going to want to listen to music and watch great movie shows and watch great entertainment shows. It's just, these are the things that make the world turn. If you're not thriving in that, it's probably because you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. People kind of always say, oh, well, is advertising screwed? I was like, have you used the internet? Because that only exists because of advertising. I mean, the amount.
Are you aware of what Google and Facebook have done in the last 20 years?
Yeah, exactly.
How they make their money. I mean, they're 2 of the top 5 most successful businesses in the world whose entire income is dependent on advertising, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in terms of your technological posture, I mean, you mentioned training your own de-aging AI model. What else are you guys doing that's
Is that
sort
not
of
enough,
yours?
Orlando? No.
Sorry?
Is that not enough?
Yeah.
No,
I just assumed it couldn't be one
just one
thing.
of the most complex problems that's ever been solved. But thank you. Yeah. I think
I just knew you wouldn't stop there. Once you cracked that, it's not like you put your pen down and went, that's good for this year.
There are a couple of things that are kind of like the way we look at kind of, for taking AI as an example of the way we look at how we can apply AI in what we're doing, it sits really in two buckets. Like how do we accelerate and simplify kind of relatively straightforward tasks, both on the production side of what we're doing, so from a bidding perspective, and learning from our own data around what we have, what we thought something was going to cost to do and what it actually costs to do. And so when we're bidding something that's similar, the next time we've inherited knowledge around that, or accelerating kind of more basic rudimentary kind of tasks and using AI to accelerate that. So, and I think like lots of companies will look at that. And actually a lot of, depending on who you're working with, a lot of the software providers that you're working with will start to integrate more and more of those services into their product anyway. And the second part, I suppose, is really about what are the tools that we think are going to be really very useful on a recurring basis for our clients, for projects that we inhabit. So de-aging is an example of one. There's another tool set that we've developed, which basically can take a live action plate and split it into all of its various different depth passes, which it's taking the knowledge that we would have from CGI, where you in the making of that CGI image, you split it and then you composite it back together again. What we're doing is taking live action imagery, splitting it through our AI model that we've built, and then have the ability to relight those scenes completely. So you can
see
you
that
can then
I mean, if you don't mind me saying, Darren, that sounds a whole lot harder than the de-aging.
They're both pretty tricky.
Yeah, it sounds harder. And to me, that sounds a lot more useful. I mean, because that's useful on every shot potentially, whereas de-aging is okay if somebody's got a flashback. Like,
I think in episodic TV, by the way, there's a lot, like what you see is a lot of episodic TV that spans periods of time. So that's why that's a kind of repeat one. I think you've got to be careful with the relighting. I think I can't remember when it was, about 10, 15 years ago, there was a kind of innovation in color grading that meant there was a bunch of different kind of technology solutions that allowed you to import maths into the grade, right? And that meant that you could grade very particular areas. But what it also kind of did is it took away some of what the compositor had done and put it in the hands of the colorist. And that actually, there's often a reason why a compositor has done something in a particular way and why a colorist is, they've different complementary skill sets. And I think, so what I mean really is that I don't think we want to be sitting here relighting what Chivo has shot in camera. That would seem quite a wild thing to do. But there will be occasions where there is a need, there is a requirement, because light died and we ran out of light or different kind of things.
Yeah.
So we can
cloud cover for the wrong 5 minutes. I mean,
you can do.
We need to make our days
do more interesting things.
We do have to move from here.
Exactly, and these models are really, really powerful, but we're still iterating on it. And our approach then is to spend a hell of a lot of intensive time building the models in let's want a better way, very, very powerful high compute GPU systems, but parsing them out so they become, I suppose, a tool set that can be done on a regular workstation. So you do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of developing the model, and then you're able to put it into a workflow where many, many artists are able to utilize those things. But again, I think you've got to be thoughtful about how you and when you use technology and how you use it, that you don't solve problems that weren't really problems, that you solve real problems, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, the tech companies kind of come at it from a really generalist perspective. And I think that in the professional world, you have to be using a scalpel for the right cut, and you have to be using the right tool for the right scenario. But when you talk about sort of model training, I think that the colloquial understanding of model training is like we said, sort of very generalist. It sounds like you're doing a lot of machine learning, basic machine learning work. How, in what sorts of environments are you doing that, training? What tools are being used there?
you're going to get beyond my pay grade
Okay, totally fine. Yeah,
pretty
mine
fast.
too. Mine too. I only know enough to ask the question.
I guess the things that we're very conscious of is where the data sets that we're working with coming from. So I think about 2 weeks ago, Netflix released their guidelines on the application of AI, and we were really pleased to see that we were compliant with everything that they had in there already. But I think there's a natural caution, both legal and ethical, around the data sets that you're using. And I think a lot of what we're often thinking about is how do you make the data set as limited, find the spot, the optimum place around what is the amount of data that you need. So, for example, in the de-aging model, one of the really powerful parts of that is that we don't need a target historical reference to work with. Because it's working on a simulation basis, it's doing it based off the current one. And if you imagine trying to do, a celebrity actor, actually licensing that material from 20 years ago can be not only expensive, but also incredibly legally cumbersome and time consuming. And so it's recognizing what are actual production issues, in a professional environment, and kind of, okay, let's try to solve problems that we see on a repeating basis. And then, look, there ends up being tools that we develop for very particular and specific projects, typically in the film and episodic space, because they might be 1 year, 2 year long projects, or you're trying to do different things. Like we I suppose, leaders and advocates in the adoption of USD, which is a universal scene descriptor, which is a way of sharing files of creature characters across multiple vendors, so that if we create a perfect version of Sonic, we did for Sonic 3, we can then provide that to the studio, who can have multiple vendors, multiple partners working on it, knowing that the quality will be the same. Historically, what used to happen was every single company working on it would have their own version of that character. And you would see huge variability between shots, right? So you go, oh my God, that's the company who did that one, right?
Right. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. You sort of imagine that it's all being created centrally and then pushed out. And so you're now doing that for the studios, and then they give it out as part of their kit of parts to anybody who's...
And what happened also is, in order to kind of preserve that quality, they would sometimes then go to, like, who's the largest company, which wasn't necessarily highest common factor. It was like, who could cater for 2,500 shots, rather than who were the best people at building the character and deploying it. And I think, we're probably less interested in doing 5,000 shots on one show, but we might be interested in taking on, 500, 1,000, 2,000 of the most complex, most interesting ones, knowing that somebody else doing other work. And we can be a lead partner on that by developing out the character in a way that can then be shared with other companies that are working on the project. Because in the film and episodic space, there's nearly always multi-vendor shows for anything kind of above $20 million.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you so much for doing this. I do have one more question if you have the time, but it's a question I've been asking everyone, which is, the late great Dan Wyden had a quote where he said, "You're useless to me unless you fucked up big at least twice," which I always loved, because it sort of gave you a lot of protection on your first 2 fuck ups. But I was wondering, can you remember, and would you be willing to admit a time where you fucked up, whether big or small, and then what you learned from it?
I mean, I think I kind of fuck up all the fucking time, right? I think making mistakes is, I can't stand the language of it, the kind of like fail fast sort of something in it makes my skin crawl. But by the same token, I completely believe that if you're not trying things, you're not improving. And unless you're making a lot of mistakes, you're not going to get better. And I think, like, I do remember when we first opened, like, then we got a whole bunch of small things wrong. Like we were doing our first client call. We literally first client call. We were actually in the space that we're in London now, which is an amazing space on 14th floor of Old Street. But client, the other end of the line, literally had no idea whether we were sitting in a garage and had a couple of boxes. Anyway, we had a new telephone system, and we hadn't tested it. And the first time we switched it on was during the call. an A-list director who we have worked with many times since Mateus. We did the call dropped like 3 times. And I don't quite know why, but I think he kind of went, I think the feedback was, we'll come back to you guys when you're ready, right? We just weren't sure. Anyway, like we threw out the file system, we started again. I also had this kind of great idea that when we were starting that we shouldn't have any internal email. And we didn't, and we don't. We've never had it. We've never had it. But for the first week and a half, nor had we figured out how to use Slack, which at the time people didn't know about and weren't particularly using it. There was not many people to train you or show you how to use it. This is 7 years ago. And so we basically shouted at each other for about 2 weeks as we kind of figured out, like, but truth of it is that there was a lot of little mistakes that we made at that very early stage. But my overriding memory, particularly at that beginning stage, was like just, and it still remains true today, just that sense of optimism, that sense of like, at that stage we were 6, then 12, then 16 people we are going to change the way everything gets done. We're going to do things in a different way. We're going to create something powerful and interesting. We're sitting here like 450, 500 people later with LA, New York, Toronto, London, Mumbai, and it feels like that same energy is still there, but it was electrifying, in London at that time. I'm in LA now. We've got 45 people in the studio here. It's got that same sort of fizzing energy. People just want to do great stuff, and I'm pretty sure we'll make a load more mistakes as we go along.
That brings up a question though, like how do you keep that? How do you, as you grow into multiple offices, how do you keep that cultural connection? How do you make the LA office feel similar to the London office and the Toronto, how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think one thing so there is no suffix to Untold except studios. There's no Untold LA or New York or London. And I think operationally that's reflected in how we work. So, what we do, we're not trying to sell wares. We try to assemble teams to work on a project for a customer or a client that has a need. And that will mean drawing from the very best talent globally. Typically if a project coming into LA, we'll obviously make sure that the people who are dealing with our client locally are based here. But we will look across the whole business to go, how do we make the best piece of work? And that will involve, a myriad of people from all the different kind of parts of the studio. And so that means that what that means is it's quite different to a widened approach, which is very kind of deliberately siloed and individual kind of personality basis. But what it means is there's a high degree of communication and cultural sharing and collaboration required just to exist. So that's a good starting point. And then I think you've got to have a pretty good view that culture is not owned by founders or of a company. It is dynamic. It is, and what you want is that it gets stretched and pulled in new directions by bringing in new and interesting people. But I think you can also, as leaders within the company, set the agenda for what's important. And I think consistently talking about the things that we believe in, we genuinely believe in creativity. We genuinely believe that if you have great people doing great work, that is self-fulfilling and virtuous as a circle. So I think that's, and that kind of generates a kind of common DNA with different accents and different voices and different expressions. But that have a singular kind of belief in the same things, and I think that's what ties us together, really. And I'm excited to go to different parts, different studios, and experience it in a different way. But know that there's a kind of common truth that we all care about doing good work.
Yeah. Well, dude, that's fantastic. I think that's a great place to end on. Thank you so much for doing this. I just so appreciate it. I'm also so glad you're in LA. I'm going to see you soon. That's all.
Yeah,
just
I can't wait to see you.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Orlando. Thanks a million. Lovely to see you. And look forward to seeing you. Yeah, take care.